Good morning, Liberty. It is Friday morning, January 4th, 2019. This is the first show of 2019. My name is Michael Boldin, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast in downtown Los Angeles. I appreciate you joining me as we broadcast live for the 10th Amendment Center here from my home office that I hope to do a little upgrade on in the near future. And so good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's here live right now through YouTube or if you're watching later on in the archives. I want to get right into our discussion today because it's really something that, and I put in the show notes that I'm going to go ahead and unravel this. And I am far from the expert on the depths of foreign policy. If you want that, you really should listen to Scott Horton over at the Scott Horton Show, or he did a really good interview on Tom Woods' podcast recently. I also want to thank a group, the Tom Woods Show Elite Group, who actually sponsored a really nice Christmas Eve, Christmas season donation to the 10th Amendment Center, working with Tom. Tom made the decision to go to the 10th Amendment Center for the donation, but the group actually organized it. So that was really cool. So shout out to them as well. But if you really want to get into the depths of kind of the nitty gritty of the foreign policy aspect, who's where, who's been where, who's doing what, and like who's on what side, it's a real messy chessboard. And Horton, Woods, and a few others are really the experts on that. I am not. But what I want to talk about today in regards to the Syria withdrawal is whether or not it's actually happening, and the spin that I'm seeing in the media. I don't actually have an answer to this. I have some inclination as I've been doing reading on this over the past few days, and I think maybe going through the articles that I found here that give me a little bit of insight on it, or a little bit more. I think maybe as a group watching this or listening and getting your feedback from the live chat, it's possible we can kind of come to what we think is actually happening. So speaking of the live chat, over here on YouTube in the live chat, I want to say hi to Existence, Scouse Jack, Keegan the Tennessean. Good afternoon from the Great Smoky Mountains. Yes, and good morning to Ward Lawrence down in Texas as well. I appreciate you all joining me. Of course, we don't just do this as a video. As after we post, I also take the audio of it and submit it as an audio podcast. We have our podcast available through iTunes, Google, and Spotify, and we're going to be expanding on that in the coming months as well. Also, hi to Logan Boydell and Harry Chin. Thank you to Logan to remind me to remind you that if you are watching, whether it's live or in the archives, to smash the like button. You can be on YouTube or BitChute or BitTube, where we're going to start uploading as well. If you smash that like button, you're basically telling the system to show it to more people. And for those of you who have been doing it, I'm very grateful. So smash the like button. Of course, subscribe, leave some comments. And if you have some ideas, you can feel free to email us here. I read all of them over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. We don't always respond, but either myself or someone else will get back to you. And I do read all the feedback that we get, or as much as I can. Maybe I miss some. So Syria. So there's been this kind of discussion. Last month, Trump ordered what everyone's calling kind of an extreme short notice withdrawal. So all of a sudden, out of nowhere, supposedly according to what we're seeing in both the mainstream and in the mainstream media and in the partisan kind of not mainstream media. So I kind of separate the two. There's the establishment media. This is the CBS, NBC, Fox, ABC, CNN, and MSNBC. The real big ones, the New York Times, Washington Post, all the old school ones. And then you have the more modern ones. Things like Think Progress isn't necessarily mainstream media, but it is establishment partisan media. Everything that they do comes from a partisan slant to protect Democrats and attack Republicans. So from those two kind of general sources, I've been seeing this narrative that Trump ordered a short-term withdrawal out of nowhere. What a surprise. The allies are being abandoned, etc. Then I saw that, so I think that was back around the 19th or the 20th of December. Then I saw at the end of the year and then going into the last few days that Trump was going to change his position on this. First, he was giving it a 30-day withdrawal. Now he's already changing it to 4 months. And based on your preconceived notion about the president, you may have a different perspective on how to approach this. So I think it's important to actually step away from our own personal feelings about the president as an individual, and maybe even what he has done or has said he was going to do, or has not done or not said he was going to do. If we separate that, I think we can get a clearer picture. Full disclosure, I have zero fondness for the president other than I remember getting up during the campaign season and immediately waking up and looking at YouTube and hearing some of the things that he was saying, going after the established and the mainstream, the establishment. And I loved a lot of things that he was talking about the U.S. shouldn't be policing the world, and just like laughing my head off because he was entertaining to watch. And I liked some of the things he was saying, and I disliked a lot. And since he's been president, and if you've watched or listened to this show regularly, you know I'm no fan of the many things that he has done. Signing huge spending bills, the bump stock ban, signing the Patriot Act, the FISA extension, mass surveillance, asset forfeiture. I'm not a fan. But if I can separate what my view is and what my preconceived notions of what I think he could or couldn't do, or where I think he's going to go because I think he's a bad guy or something like that. And maybe you guys can challenge me on that as you're watching or listening. Hey, Boldin, it sounds like you're like jumping the gun on this. I need to back off from that to give you as an honest overview as possible. So looking back to the chat, since I mentioned that one more time, hi to EHP Training. I just want to point out I did get your email yesterday about spreading the word about getting memberships out for Bama Carry, etc. I think that's a really good idea. I don't really know how we can do that, but I'd love to hear your ideas. I'll get back to you probably in the next few days. I'm always pretty slow with getting back on emails, but I will definitely get back to you on that. I appreciate you mentioning it. Thanks to Keegan for smashing the like button. And hi to Justin Bayola. Happy New Year to you. I appreciate you joining in. So, okay, all that stuff out of the way. Let's, again, go over what's going on as far as, are we really going to leave Syria? Because I think a lot of people are having that question. I'm seeing some people that I support, or that I read regularly, that I'm interested in their viewpoints, questioning, is this actually going to happen? And this is kind of the narrative. So let's go through this a little bit here. My first article is going to be here from the American Conservative, written by a guy named Gareth Porter. And he points out that Trump scores and he breaks the general's 50-year war record. Gareth writes, and I first learned about him listening to the Scott Horton show. Scott has interviewed him many, many, many times over the years. So Gareth writes, the mainstream media has attacked President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria as impulsive, blindsiding his own national security team, but detailed published accounts of the policy process over the course of the year tell a very different story. And I think this is a piece of the propaganda that we're getting, that, oh, if you're going to be in, and then you're just going to withdraw out of nowhere and no one knows, this is dangerous. And they want to scare people. They're always going to use fear to make any change to the status quo. If you do this, people are going to die. If you do this, the terrorists are going to win. If you do this, they're going to nuke your home. That's always, always the message. And I do have an interesting quote of the day. Finally, I've been kind of skipping those at the end of the show. I've got a quote of the day that discusses this. So Gareth points out that the media is telling us that this is impulsive, no notice, out of nowhere. But that's not really the case. And he also adds, the entire episode thus represents a new variant of a familiar pattern dating back to Vietnam, in which national security advisors put pressure on reluctant presidents to go along with existing or proposed military deployments in a war zone. They're using propaganda to create a public pressure narrative. So if the truth doesn't get out, and if the president isn't as strong as he should be on this, he may back down. And the narrative continues with that. We're already hearing that the president is backing down or slowing things. That's what we're hearing. But is that really the case? So let's go through a few more things. First, addressing the idea that this is an impulsive, out-of-nowhere situation. Gareth Porter points out in his report that, quote, in a March rally in Ohio, ostensibly about health care reform, Trump suddenly blurted out, quote, we're coming out of Syria, like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now. Very soon, we're coming out. So he made a very public statement in March of 2018 saying that we're going to leave Syria. Now, if you have the perspective that the president is always a liar and using propaganda, then you may say, well, he was just full of crap. You didn't believe it. But if you think that he's telling the truth all the time, then you're like expecting it to happen. But either way, it doesn't matter. Just the fact that he said it, actually, just that one statement, that one public statement at a rally, which I'm assuming was pretty large, that had nothing to do with foreign policy. It was a healthcare reform rally. The fact that he was talking about it publicly in March of 2018 smashes, in my view, not the likes like everyone else who is watching, smashing that like button. It smashes the idea that this was an impulsive, out-of-nowhere decision just in December. Oh, well, it's just one day in December, Trump said, we're going to pull our troops out and abandon allies. No, he's been talking about it publicly. He's mentioned it for at least 9 months at this point. So you would think that he's talking for a guy who's like, I'm trusting my generals, always talking about it. You'd think he's bringing it up to his generals for quite a while. Then he mentions it again the next month in early April. Gareth Porter points out that Trump's impatience with his advisors on Syria boiled over into a major confrontation at a National Security Council meeting when he ordered them unequivocally to accept a fundamentally different Syria deployment policy. This tells me that they've already been having discussions. They were already having discussions pre-March. He announced it publicly in March. Maybe it was even before. There might be something else where he said it. And then by April, he's so frustrated that he's not getting the results that he wants to get out of Syria that he's having a big debate in the National Security Council meeting. He opened that meeting with his public stance that the U.S. must end its intervention in Syria and the Middle East more broadly. Now, I have not seen any backing up of that. Then again, I would like to. None of these deployments and these police actions or enforcing UN sanctions or whatever is going on, limited bombing strikes, none of this has been authorized as the Constitution requires by Congress. They've all been unilateral and put in motion for a long time. So in April, March he announces it publicly. In April, he has a fight behind the scenes with the National Security Council. He wants to get out, clearly. To me, that tells me he wants to, whether he's going to follow through. Like, where I think Trump is full of garbage is when he only makes public statements and he really doesn't actually do any pressure. I mean, for all I know, maybe he's making the same type of statements behind the scenes. But in areas where I'm unhappy with his policies, I feel like he says things that are popular to whip up his base, and then he doesn't really have follow-through. Well, on this, I probably would have said the same thing back in March. Oh, he's just saying that. I probably would have said that if I was aware of this. And maybe I was and forget about it, but that's how I would have approached it. And now I'd be eating my words, but gladly, because the U.S. shouldn't be in Syria. There was no congressional authorization to send troops to Syria. And if you watch or listen to the show regularly, you'll remember the episode, I should have linked it, but I'm just thinking of it off the top of my head, where we went through how the founders defined war. If you search our YouTube channel, you can do a Google search for founders defined war. You'll find probably a few videos. Basically, it's violence by a sovereign over opposition. So unless the government of Syria or the people of Syria are welcoming U.S. presence there and U.S. bombing, then it's an act of war, according to the founders. And an act of war requires a declaration of war from Congress or an authorization to use military force, whatever you want to call it. But Congress has not been involved in that. And in fact, all the presidents in modern times claim that they don't need it, including Trump, which is a different, I think, question that maybe we can touch on at the end of the show. So he's having this debate. Mattis tells him in that meeting, an immediate withdrawal from Syria was impossible to carry out responsibly. This is according to Gareth's report. It would risk the return of the Islamic State and would play into the hands of Russia, Iran, and Turkey, whose interests ran counter to those of the United States. So in other words, you can't stop fighting them. You always have to have an ongoing presence forever, or, well, we're going to have problems with enemies. So at that point, Trump said they could have 5 to 6 months to destroy the Islamic State. This is in April. Look, get it done by October, and then we're getting out. But then he also made it clear that he did not want them to come back to him in October and say that they've been unable to do it and have to remain in Syria. So he's already told them, look, we got to come out. Okay, we should come out now. Okay, I'm done fighting with you. Get it done in 6 more months. And then after 6 months, I don't want to hear that we got to stay there. And so here it is in December, and then now January of 2019, we're hearing, oh, we got to stay there longer. So from what I'm seeing is that the president is actually being honest about this, and this is a very good thing. Withdrawing from Syria is the right thing, and I should actually separate that. I should actually just say, I think it's actually happening, or the president is trying to make it happen. Now, Gareth notes that Trump's national security team had prepared carefully for that meeting. They were probably expecting this. These people are very savvy in order to steer him away from an explicit timetable for withdrawal. They had brought papers that omitted any specific options for withdrawal timetables. Instead, as the detailed AP account shows, they framed the options as a binary choice, either an immediate pullout or an indefinite presence. And we've heard this on everything, whether it was Iraq, Afghanistan, everywhere. We always hear this. Either it's like they're out or they're in. And leaving is always bad. So the whole idea that this has been an impulsive, out of nowhere announcement from the president that we're getting out of Syria is a 100% lie in my view. I mean, it's hard to actually say that it isn't a lie. And so all these articles and news reports and talking heads who are saying that this is impulsive and dangerous and lacking notice are lying to you. And they're part of the system. And they may be doing it intentionally, or they may be relying on the New York Times. I notice that a lot of times, even good publications are publishing propaganda because the New York Times started the ball rolling saying, this is what's going on. Now, I don't know if this particular piece of propaganda came from the New York Times or where, but it's come from somewhere. And it probably comes from people in the Pentagon or in the deep state, we can call them, who want to paint the president in a corner and make it politically impossible for him to follow through on what he wants to do. So we're going to see what kind of backbone, what kind of cojones Donald Trump has right now, because the establishment, deep state, military industrial complex is fighting him and trying to put him in a politically impossible place to withdraw from Syria. If he still does that, I'll say that's a heroic action. That is incredibly good. So Gareth goes on. He says, nevertheless, without referring to a timeline, the White House issued a short statement saying the U.S. role in Syria was coming to a rapid end. This was in April of 2018. Gave them 6 months, but they didn't make that public, that it was going to be a public timetable. But he told them in that meeting, I don't want to hear after October that you need more time because this has got to be done. So this is an excellent article. It's linked in the show notes. Of course, all of our show notes and archives are over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. So at the end of last year, just last week, the New York Times points out that Trump is going to allow for months for troop withdrawal in Syria. So this was after after the 19th or so, when he made the announcement. Then the narrative was that Trump, not only was he being impulsive, but he was only going to allow for 30 days. And 30 days was dangerous because it was so impulsive that no one had any notice, and now we're going to leave everyone high and dry. But the fact of the matter is he's been talking about this for at least 8 months publicly, and probably longer than that. I'm assuming that it's going back months and months and months before March. That's just a guess because it's already gotten to a boiling point by April. The fact that he announced it publicly, it's almost like he's trying to make things happen behind the scenes. If I were thinking of the Oliver Stone film, the kind of narrative, Trump is actually trying to convince his military brass to get the Syria thing done. Get out of there. They're not making it happen. And then so he's like, oh man, if I try to do anything, these guys are going after me. Not that they're necessarily going to kill him, but they're going after him like they are now with propaganda. I better make this public so I can have a paper trail of what's going on. I think he's actually being really smart strategically. Then by April, things are boiling over. He's telling him 6 months. And now in December and January, I think it's actually good strategy on his part in how he's dealing with the deep state. So we heard that it was going to be 30 days. Another lie. Well, let's get to that. And then the follow-up just a couple weeks later from the New York Times. This was the big deal from the New York Times on New Year's Eve that Trump is now backing down, and it's going to be 4 months. Here's what the New York Times says. President Trump has agreed to give the military about 4 months to withdraw the 2,000 U.S. troops in Syria, administration officials said on Monday. Now, keep in mind, administration officials said this. The president has not that I've seen. They also pointed out that Trump is now, quote, backtracking from his abrupt order 2 weeks ago that the military pull out within 30 days. How many lies can the New York Times have in one sentence? I think we're going to find out that it is 1, 2, 3, 4. I think the 4 lies are that that there are 2,000 troops. There's actually about 7,000 that are in and out of Syria. That's a half lie, I guess. A lot of them are based in Iraq, and then 2,000 probably physically in Syria. You'll probably get more info on that from someone like Horton. And then he's backtracking from this abrupt order is another lie. That's an abrupt order. That the military pull out within 30 days. That I think we'll find is also a lie. And that he has agreed to 4 months. I think that is also a lie. But I guess this is a preconceived notion. So that's the new narrative. That this was abrupt. We know that's bullshit. And pardon my language, but I'm really irritated. As an activist, I first got involved in political activism as an anti-war activist. I was a hard leftist at the time, and economically I was a complete idiot. I didn't understand property rights or anything. I just did not want the U.S. government waging wars all over the world. So I get really worked up about this kind of things. And I have not seen too often in my lifetime, really probably never, presidents talking about elected presidents in office talking about or taking action to end any conflicts. It's usually just some excuse to keep things going or making things worse. So I think this is positive. Keegan says language pardoned and existence. My ears. I want this to be a family show as well. So you guys rule. Thank you. So I think there's lies here. We know the big one is that this is an abrupt order. Now let's get to this 30-day and 4 months thing. During a surprise trip to Iraq last week, surprise trip, we don't even know if that's the case, the New York Times reports that Mr. Trump privately told the commander of American forces in Syria that the military could have several months to complete a safe and orderly withdrawal, according to two U.S. officials. And on Sunday, the most trustworthy man on earth, Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, that's a guy I can trust when it comes to foreign policy information, told reporters that, quote, a pause situation on the troop withdrawal was in effect. So now Lindsey Graham is now putting out a narrative, probably with his buddies in the establishment, that it's actually on pause. It's not even happening at this point. Creating a scenario that if Trump actually makes it happen, for people who aren't finding the truth, he looks like a crazy man. The Times points out, by extending the timetable for withdrawal to several months, again, repeating that Trump's idea was abrupt and it was 30 days, Mr. Trump stuck to his commitment to untangle the U.S. from years-long military commitments, but also heeded warnings from current and former military leaders of the danger of a quick exit. Nevertheless, Mr. Trump's latest plan left open the question of whether an orderly pullout from Syria would even happen. So where do we go from here? Let's go to Senator Lindsey Graham again. Lindsey Graham is getting headlines. Here on the BBC, Trump is now slowing troop withdrawal, says Lindsey Graham. Here's what they say. Senator Lindsey Graham suggested the withdrawal had been slowed, and he was now reassured of the president's commitment after meeting him on Sunday. Mr. Trump's troop pullout plan met strong criticism from major allies. The White House has yet to comment on Mr. Graham's remarks. And here's the quote from Lindsey. And this guy, if there's anybody that should be locked up, Lindsey Graham is at the top of the list. So is Mike Pompeo. He says, quote, I think we're in a pause situation where we are reevaluating what's the best way to achieve the president's objective of having people pay more and do more. Graham is, I know Trump has really kind of approached this whole issue of Syria, of, our allies aren't paying for it. It's an economic issue. And you know what? At this point, the foreign policy machine is part of what's bankrupting the country, part of the reason why there's so much taxation, so much inflation from the Federal Reserve. These are part of it. So yes, that is a valid concern. The president isn't talking about the fact that he hasn't been constitutionally authorized to do this, and so therefore, under the Constitution, he needs to withdraw. That's a different question. It's important, but if he gets it half right, that's great. 20% right, that's great. So the narrative from Lindsey Graham, who is one of the most dangerous people in Washington, D.C., or at least in Congress, one of the worst people, is that now things are pausing. So should we trust him? I don't know. Here, on January 2nd, Donald Trump calls Syria sand and death. This is in the London Telegraph. The U.S. president said, quote, Syria was lost long ago. It was lost long ago. We're not talking about vast wealth. We're talking about sand and death. I'm getting out, and we're getting out of Syria. Lindsey Graham on the 31st says it's in a pause situation. He's committed. A couple days later, Donald Trump says, look, we're getting out. How many times does he need to say it for us to start believing it? I just highlighted this one other thing. If you're watching, you can see it in the yellow. I use an app or an extension called Liner on my Chrome. I wish some of the extensions, maybe someone can give me some tip, were available in the Brave browser, which I much prefer for privacy reasons. But I haven't figured out how to use this in Brave, or if there's a highlighter extension for Brave. If anybody knows, please let me know. I like this. Trump said, quote, I shouldn't be popular in Europe, because supposedly this is a very unpopular thing to get out of wars. When Bush was in Iraq, there were marches all over Europe. Tens, hundreds of thousands of people. Get out of Iraq. Even in regards to Syria, there are some protests. So it's probably not unpopular with the general public to stop engaging in wars. It's just the establishment who feeds off of this garbage. He says, I shouldn't be popular in Europe. I want Europe to pay. Again, the monetary issue. I don't care about Europe. I'm not elected by Europeans. I'm elected by American taxpayers, frankly. I do like that honesty. That's really good. So let's get to the heart of where I'm going with this. This is from Jason Ditz over at antiwar.com, who does all their news reports there. He's following up on this sand and death report. Jason says, quote, Trump went on to say that he has not set any official timetable for the U.S. withdrawal, and that the times being talked about elsewhere didn't come from him. This started weeks ago with talk of a 30-day drawdown and has since been in the 4-month range. So Trump is himself saying, look, all these figures, I need to find the actual source of that quote. Maybe I should message Jason to find it. But he's a very trustworthy reporter. And if he's finding that Trump is saying this, I guess I just need to see the link. I need to see it. But if this is correct, to me, this is huge. Because not only are they telling us this is an abrupt withdrawal out of nowhere, then they're telling us that he came up with this 30-day thing, and then he changed it to 4 months. And Trump himself supposedly is saying that he didn't come up with any of these dates. We know that he's been talking about this for at least 8 months, probably longer. Let's say a year. Let's just say 8 months, whatever. It's not abrupt at that point. 8 months is plenty of time. Gave them a 6-month notice. October came and went. Now in December, he says, let's do it. Now the media tells us that it's 30 days, but he never said that. And then all of a sudden he's backtracking. And then he didn't backtrack because he never gave the 30 days in the first point. Jason points out that, quote, CNN claimed that the 4-month figure came from the Pentagon. What a surprise. With an unnamed official saying it was the military trying to please the president and not get everyone killed. He added that the Pentagon should keep troops in Syria even longer. The unnamed official wants troops in Syria longer and is coming up with this timetable, which the president says is coming from other people. So we're validating it from various sources. And Jason points out that this is, of course, all in keeping with the narrative among the Pentagon brass, most of whom never want to leave Syria at all. The idea that it would take 4 months minimum to remove 2,000 troops from eastern Syria, however, does not make a lot of sense. So, at least from my perspective, the way I'm kind of piecing this puzzle together is that we're getting tons of lies. I believe at this point, I want to see proof that the president is going to pull the U.S. out of Syria. I would like to see him, and I saw also half the troops from Afghanistan. He's getting this much pushback on 2,000 troops, which is small compared to the entire U.S. military empire around the globe. Okay, piece by piece. I'm going to encourage this and say it's a very positive step and that he's being fought tooth and nail. And I think there are many lies happening. We can summarize the lies are that supposedly the idea to do this was abrupt and out of nowhere, that there was a 30-day notice out of nowhere, that it was changed to 4 months, and that it's not happening and it's on pause. These are all total nonsense. They're total propaganda, and I think they're being done to create a scenario where the president, an individual, a human being, is put in a place where he can't do it. And this is part of how, think of all the propaganda things that they did in Iran back in the 1950s to topple that government. I mean, this is how they do things. Not necessarily even topple the government here, but to create outcomes that are beneficial to them. I'm going to skip over this article from Ilya Somin talking about the constitutional limits because we're going a little bit long here today. But he's basically complaining about this. He seems to be on the side of getting out of Syria, saying that it's unconstitutional, but he's complaining that the president is talking about the cost rather than the constitutional power. And I think they're two different. I mean, they go hand in hand. But if you're doing the right thing for, let's say, 50% of the right reasons or 20% of the right reasons, let's not attack him for that. Let's not attack someone for doing the right thing. That's what I want to kind of get to here. So before we go, and I hope you found this very interesting, I'm learning, if I haven't looked in the chat here, Justin points out lots of military money goes into Graham's pockets, as in military industrial complex money. His strength and securities pack, I was just going to ask, is basically all military complex money. Ward Lawrence says big bankers like Rothschilds have been profiting from war since World War II. Tommy Stock, for how many years down the road, but we'll be hearing about the loss of lives of our troops in Syria like we've heard from everyone else. Exactly. Scouse Jack. This sounds like Ron Paul. This is awesome. So easy to go in, so hard to pull out. So Ron used to say in his campaigns, we just went in, we just marched in, we can just march out. Exactly. And staying, I think, makes the mess worse. So kudos to the president so far. We do need to see follow through on this. So we'll see where it goes in the next 30 days to 4 months or whatever it is. But I will give him a lot of kudos if he does the right thing on this in the face of some of the worst people on earth. So our quote of the day. Again, I hope you found this interesting, insightful. I hope I'm doing a pretty decent job of kind of laying out where I see this kind of really multi-layered deep state propaganda. I think it's very dangerous, very sophisticated. I don't fully understand it, but I'm seeing things kind of play out before my eyes. I hope you find it insightful and educational as well. So James Madison warned us, quote, "The means of defense against foreign danger have been always the instruments of tyranny at home." That is timeless, as they keep warning us about how just 2,000 troops leaving another country that were never there under congressional authorization as required by the Constitution is somehow going to empower all kinds of enemies that might destroy our lives and our liberty. That in and of itself, that fear-mongering, is one of the instruments of tyranny here at home. So again, thank you for watching. Happy 2019. I hope you had a wonderful holiday, a wonderful Christmas, wonderful New Year's. I hope the year is off to a good start. We are finally back on track. We will be broadcasting live Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here at Good Morning Liberty. Make sure to smash that like button, whether you're watching here on YouTube, live or in the archives, BitChute, BitTube, Keyport.tv, Brighteon.com, Facebook, Twitter, Minds.com, and then, of course, our podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google, etc. You guys rule. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I'll see you next week. Hope you have a great weekend. Thanks again for watching.